Well, Strive, first, let me thank you for coming. Strive and I have had many wonderful opportunities to spend time with each other in recent years, at times in New York, at UNGA, at times in other UN events or other meetings, at times talking about connectivity and development in Africa. But as you wouldn't have reason to know, but it's in public view, Strive and I are both members of the Netflix board of directors, so we also get together and we talk about what did you watch recently, as well as other things about Netflix business. But thank you for joining me.
No, thank you, Brad. And first of all, thank you for that extraordinary presentation. And if you don't mind, I think I'm going to have to steal this from you and put it on my Facebook platform where almost 6 million young African entrepreneurs listen, because that was a truly extraordinary presentation and gives us all a very good perspective. No, thank you for that leadership.
Well, thank you. Well, I wanted to start a little bit. We'll have a conversation about these issues and what they mean for Africa. And in particular, I think we'll look at it a bit through the lens of what you have built in Africa over time. There are many of you who may know Strive's personal story, but I want to start with it. You were a young man in Zimbabwe, and you decided you were going to bring connectivity to people in Africa. And can you share a little bit of what motivated you to do that, and frankly, what enabled you to do it? Because it would not have been an obvious bet when you were a young man to say, this is the person who's going to change connectivity in Africa.
No, thank you, Brad. I was a young telephone engineer working in Zimbabwe. And as everywhere else in the world and Africa at the time, telecommunications was considered state domain, as they called it. And working in Africa as an engineer, 75% of our people had never even heard the telephone ringing. And then, as any young engineer at the time, I saw the emergence of the mobile technology. This was with early 90s. And I became a bit of an evangelist, saying, hey, there's a solution to this. And the more I shouted, the more I was treated with total suspicion, became an enemy agent and the rest of it and so forth, and it became pretty ugly. But the long and short of it is I and a lot of young entrepreneurs at the time, many of them are old men like me now, we pretty much pushed that the solution was private capital. They had to give up the state monopolies and let private capital move in. And it moved in both domestic, global, and today 75% of our people have a phone. And there's 1 billion cell phones in Africa, and we just crossed 500 million smartphones. Which is probably equal to the United States in the number of, but we have more people. So it was a tremendous revolution to be a part of.
What was the hardest thing you had to overcome in persuading people that there was a role for more than a state monopoly in solving this problem?
Fear. Yeah. There is always a fear when people have control of something and they're going to lose control. There were people in these state telephone companies who saw themselves losing their jobs. There were regulators, policy. It was across the continent and in other parts of the world too. So I would say fear, getting policymakers to see the upside. But of course, once we got it going, and then as often with Africa, capital. Mm-hmm. As I've often said, one of the most remarkable things, when you mentioned the statement, the glass is half full, Africa operates on a glass is half full. We're very, very optimistic people. But when you look at the glass half full in our economic data, for instance, 25 years ago, our GDP was 350 billion. Today, it's almost 3 trillion. We've grown. Only China has been expanding quicker than Africa. If you take the COVID years out, that's a near 5% annual growth rate. So, but we do that without external capital. Our FDI, foreign direct investment, is less than Singapore. Okay, actually, the biggest single source of capital into Africa today is remittances from Africans living in the diaspora. It's by the way, you know, for all we great appreciate for donors and others, it is not donations that drive Africa. It's internal resources and remittances. 100 billion last year in remittances is our single source of foreign investment. So we rely very much on young people that are working at Microsoft, for instance. Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's a group at Microsoft in Redmond, near Seattle, called Africans at Microsoft, all from around countries across Africa. And I don't ask them how they spend their money, but I have no doubt that they contribute to this.
But did you know that they once invited me to Microsoft? I think it was about 2014, to speak to them. So I came because I come to Seattle quite a bit. I came, and they said to me, "So, what are you doing about cloud and artificial intelligence?" I said, "Artificial intelligence? Should I be doing something?" I said, "It's not supposed to happen in my lifetime." They said, no. So that's actually when I began to really seriously work on AI and cloud.
Walk us through a little bit of your journey from a business perspective, the company you founded and the company or companies really that exist today.
Sure. So, for the first sort of from about 1993 thereabouts, I mostly focused on mobile. Going around Africa, starting mobile ventures. I made the first mobile phone call digital mobile phone call in Nigeria in 2001. So I led a consortium there. So I ran around doing that. But around about 2004, I started to think very much about data. And I said, the wireless infrastructure will not deliver on the volumes of data we are beginning to see. So I pivoted to building fiber infrastructure. And I put a pin on my wall. We are going to build from Cape to Cairo. And we actually dug along the highways all the way from South Africa to Egypt. And today we've built over 120,000 kilometers of fiber interconnecting all the African countries. We just finished one of our most exciting, most difficult builds, which was to cross the Congo forest, east to west. That took us 3 years. So that became very much part of what we were doing. And then 10 years later, and thanks to Microsoft, like I said, Microsoft came to us and said, "Can you collocate us?" I said, "What is that?" They said, "Well, we have this idea of data centers about cloud." I said, "The cloud was up here." I said, no, it's here. You got to build our data centers, and we're looking for partners. So we built the first data center in Kenya. And we've been building these ever since in different African countries. As the hyperscale players have come in, like yourselves and Google and AWS and others. And also encouraging African companies to come into the cloud. So our focus very much became get the African companies into the cloud. And you know, we are very proud of the fact that we've been great partners for Microsoft with Office 365, the Azure Stack, and so forth. And of course, as you build into that, other pieces immediately come in, cybersecurity, wow. Everybody is being hacked, even as we were building for them. And that became another business opportunity. So we pretty much have gone with the developments, and we are hopefully part of this conversation around AI and getting African companies already. You know, we've been selling Copilot to a lot of African companies. So people are very much alive to the conversation and what can we do right now.
And I think it's worth maybe just spending a moment and teasing apart what I regard as two really extraordinary accomplishments. One is getting the continent connected by fiber.
Yeah.
Obviously that requires investment, literally construction, you know, in the ground. It requires an enormous mastery of regulatory and geopolitics because governments control each territory,
Yeah.
which you've been very focused on doing. And then I would just add, especially if you look at the last year, when you know, people realize that undersea cables you know, can basically, you know, be disrupted by any of a number of navies. And as people have looked at what it has meant, say, in the Red Sea and the like, I think your contribution has become even more important, you know, given the need for real redundancy and that kind of, you know, territorial based cabling system.
Yeah, look, we are the single largest buyer of undersea cable into Africa. We're in every single one of the cables. And we do the satellites as well, as you know. So for us, we talk of 5 Cs, where it's connectivity, cloud, cybersecurity, collocation, and compute. Compute now is the buzzword in our offices. How do we position Africa to have domestic compute capabilities to face up to AI? Of course, there's a big thing at the other end called energy. Yeah. And we try and build that too, you know. We build a lot of solar and battery plants and stuff like that to help. So, but you know, again, on the positive side, is that there's a new generation of leaders today. And much of our conversations with them is no longer don't do it. Even here at UNGA, I have a string of meetings with African leaders around AI, initiated by them. And they're not calling me to say, don't do it. They're saying, how do we do it? How do we get involved? How do we make sure we're in the room? How do we do it safely? How do we benefit? So perhaps those early battles were helpful because we don't fight each other in the courts and shout at each other so much. So we're making, we're in the conversation, we're in the issues that are facing us, but we have major challenges.
If you think about the divides that are still so important, I'd love to get your perspective on what do you think it will take to close them and over what period of time. Let's just start with 25% of the population doesn't yet have a phone, half the population doesn't yet have a smartphone. What needs to happen in order to reduce those gaps?
Well, first of all, having got to where we are, we can't sit back. We have to invest. Our biggest challenge today is not so much the capital. It's skilling up to face this new challenge. Our education system, we already, I saw in one of your data points we're already home to about 40% of the world's young people under the age of 30. Okay, in the next 25 years, that'll be 60%. Our population will hit 2.5 billion this century. Okay, this is an extraordinary challenge for us to face up to, and for us to take advantage of what is happening, we have to skill up, which means a massive transformation of our education system. And for us, we look at what you just presented here with AI, and we want to get our hands on this as quickly as possible, because this is how, the only way we're going to do it. Okay, we've got to harness this in a positive way. But yes, we have to make the investments. We have to be bold in policy making. Africa doesn't work as 54 countries. It must be 54 countries working together as one. You know, we've got to get away from the political cliches of working together. Working together is not an option for us now, because individually we are cantons. But together we are a roaring lion, and we will be the roaring lion of this continent, of this century.
And I want to pull on that thread a little bit, Strive, because the nations of Africa did pull together and then turn to you during the pandemic, you know, and ask you to play a role really for the continent in helping to address vaccination and other needs. What did you learn from that experience that speaks to what needs to come next in this context?
No, thank you for that. You know, when the pandemic broke, Africa has a rotating presidency. So the president then was President Ramaphosa of South Africa. But what a lot of people don't know is he has a council of about 15 African heads of state. And so they invoked their highest emergency ever outside of a war. And they were meeting virtually every 2 weeks with him in the chair. And they appointed 7 of us as special envoys. I was obviously the most high profile because of the role that I played. But there were 6 others, like Ngozi, who runs the World Trade Organization, Dr. Kaberuka, and all these others working on different aspects. I had the difficult task of supply chains. That was actually the role that I was given. So I dealt with PPE, vaccines, and all that. And this week, actually, on Wednesday, we are publishing a book. We're launching a book of how we did it. So there was a group of us, including John Kengasong, who's now at PEPFAR. He was head of the Africa CDC. And so our mission really was to, first of all, we told the African leaders, look, we could lose 20 million people. That's what that's what the projections were. And so we're going to have to work together in a way we've never done before. So when we would meet with the heads of state, and they would simply say to us, what do you recommend? And we would say, shut down Lagos, shut down Johannesburg. Everyone must wear masks, you know. And so it came with the vaccines, and we had to negotiate to get those vaccines. And one of the least known things was that the Caribbean countries really couldn't get anything. So for the first time in their history, they said, we are African countries. And they joined our initiative. And so I was supplying vaccines to Jamaica and Trinidad. And I'm meeting with the Jamaican Prime Minister this afternoon, because I had to ship vaccines for the Jamaican athletics team for the Japanese Olympics. And we had 10 days, otherwise they wouldn't have been there, and you wouldn't have had those gold medals. So we worked incredibly hard with bringing all this, and we learned some amazing lessons, which is when Africa works as one, it works. It absolutely works. We would just walk in and tell those pharmaceutical companies, if you can't supply us now, don't come back. And we are 1.3 billion people. So you've got to listen to us. And they did, and we purchased the vaccines. But we also got extraordinary help from our partners. Mm-hmm. Our greatest partner, without a doubt, was the United States government. When President Biden came in, 2 weeks after his inauguration, 2 weeks, I got a phone call. They said, we have a meeting, we're setting up a task force, and we met every single week with the US task force. And they delivered to us on a 50-50 joint venture. They said, you purchase 50%, we supply you 50%. And that was the biggest operation of the entire pandemic. With the US, literally every single week, we had a list, and we would say we need, 20,000 for Jamaica and 2,000 for Trinidad and so forth. And we went through the list, and we had UNICEF doing the shipping. And of course, we worked with people like Microsoft as well, because the corporate sector was incredible in its support.
So if we think about the connectivity challenge and you apply some of the lessons that might be applicable from the pandemic, I want to then go to what you talked about, compute.
Yes.
And why don't you just, for a moment, I think you probably have more data centers in more countries than anybody else in Africa. Tell us a little bit about where you are today on that front.
Well, look, the African countries have made it very clear, and they're legislating for it. They want data sovereignty. Mm-hmm. We've known this for a while. It's challenging, but it means that we have to build data centers in most of the countries. And so we've been building, obviously, in places like South Africa, Kenya, with Egypt and Morocco, Nigeria, and many of Rwanda and many of these countries. So we're on a tier to build these. And of course, as you said, they're incredibly expensive. And at the core of it is the partnership we have with people like Microsoft and Google and others, because they're the big customers. We can't just go out and build. We talk to the hyperscalers and see where they are trying to get to. But obviously, African enterprise is coming in. We're now beginning to hear discussions with universities, with governments who are now saying, let's talk about our data. So it's an exciting time. And I believe that the more they let private capital play and lead the way, and I can say this, there's no company that's done more in this space than Microsoft. We've been working with Microsoft. I don't know if you know about this, Brad, but in one of the conversations I had with your people, they said, what's your priority? I said, skilling. We got to train. So we came up with this program, which we've done with Microsoft, with thousands of young people come online. They can do the courses for free, and then they pay for certification so that they can go and get a job. We need to do things like that now on steroids, mm-hmm. if our young people are to be a part of what happens here. Yes, there are good things happening.
And maybe that's a good way to sort of conclude on, I would say, these two layers of building out the compute and building out the skilling. Given the expense of building out data centers, and one thing people should know is that it is through what's called the collocation of services that you really get a data center probably first built in a new market. And so, you might read that Google and AWS and Microsoft are all present in a country, and it's really, a separate building on a single data center campus that is built by one of your companies. But given this tension between data sovereignty, every one of the 54 countries saying we want it in our territory, and the expense of bringing it to 54 countries, is there a creative path that, say, gets there eventually, but not in the next couple of years, so that countries are more comfortable relying on data centers in each other's territories?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, we have no choice but to get them to collaborate there. And, that's part of the role that people like me, and this is one of the things I'm doing even here, talking to them, that, look, don't think of it in terms of a physical structure. Okay, we have to cooperate, because just the power demands. Most of the countries, if we put a data center, one president, he said to me, build a data center. I said, great, look, here are the maths. I come in, I put a data center in. Your capital city takes 30 megawatts. You want me to put in a 20 megawatt data center. They'll chase me out of town. Because I'm going to take all the power. Yeah. Okay? So let's be careful how we approach this. So I believe that there are ways in which we can find a happy medium for this. We can do that and understand it.
That does connect to me with this obvious question. It's not enough to have an AI strategy. You have to have an electricity strategy.
Yeah.
I think people are now seeing this even in the United States, in every country. But in Africa, how do we put together a successful energy strategy that I will say starts by bringing electricity to the people who don't have it, and then adds to it for things like AI?
The interesting thing is building mobile networks in Africa. Okay, we spent more time discussing power than we discussed the telecom side. Try string fiber through the Congo forest. It's a power conversation. So in many ways, we spent a lot of time building that particular muscle. In fact, many of my investors in my data center business always surprised that half the people who come to the meeting to discuss an investment in a data center are our power people. Mm-hmm. Our power people arrive. We probably have more power engineers than we actually have data scientists. We don't have a lot of those because we're really builders. So it is a challenge, but you have to solve that problem whilst looking at the carbon footprint as well.
Yes.
Okay, so we actually have a separate renewable energy company, mm-hmm. Okay, simply to deal with data centers, which we built by spinning out the power engineering group that used to run the telecom side of our business, because we have no choice. So we've probably mapped Africa's energy resources, and us and other telecoms groups understand more about power in Africa than even governments.
Interesting.
Because there is no way you can deliver. You keep a network of 20,000 base stations running in Nigeria. You got to know what you're doing about power. And we do it. These telecoms groups do it. We manage, we monitor. So we go to companies, large companies, and we simply say, hand over your power requirements to us, because we do it to the requirements of keeping a telephone network running.
And so then let me just ask you one last question, and let me close with skilling, because I think there's a lot of folks in this room that are very focused on it. Given the perspective that you have, because it's a window on electricity needs, but it's a window on skilling as well. What one or two thoughts would you leave people here to think about in terms of what it will take to bring skilling for AI to Africa?
First of all, the biggest single challenge and opportunity is to address the education system, okay? Because globally, it's not fit for purpose. And in Africa, it's much more acute. We've got to skill young people in a way that they feel they have a part of the future. If we look at the Industrial Revolution as a good example, which you presented very well, well, when we look back, the failure to show the benefits of the Industrial Revolution created some of the worst wars in the 20th century. As soon as people feel they're not a part of this, the intensity of conflict and division takes place. We've got to look at that history as well. We saw the First World War, Second. Now, I'm not saying it was caused by this, but in the midst of such change, people can take us into a very dark place. Mm-hmm. So what we got to go do right now, given what we know, we've got to train, we've got to create opportunities, we've got to make sure that young people don't when you see a young person cross the Sahara and then the Mediterranean, something's wrong. Hmm. This is the most forbidding journey that somebody has to ever take. So we've got to make sure that we address these challenges from a global perspective and not them and us. We can't build walls or hope on the Mediterranean being a wall. We've got to really address education, training, and investment. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, let me just conclude by thanking you. I would just say, Elizabeth, I think, had to leave, but she did have that interesting comment about the power of optimism. These are hard problems. They're daunting, and at times they feel insurmountable. Without a sense of optimism, I'm not sure that anything is possible. I think you've given us a lot of cause for optimism in the thoughts that you've shared, but also the example you provide. It took a lot of optimism to build the company you did, to connect all of Africa, to bring compute, and to create a continent today where 1 of every 2 people has a smartphone, 3 of every 4 have a phone, and more progress ahead. So join me in saying thank you to Strive for